Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, and welcome to this exciting webinar looking at the Global Plastics Treaty and Opportunities for Southeast Asia. My name is Matthew Baird. I'm the Director of the Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law, and on behalf of Ariel and our supporters for today, I'd like to welcome you to an exciting webinar on a Global Plastics Treaty. And today marks an important day because it is the beginning of the UN Environment Assembly where this is on the agenda, and we hope to hear more about the Global Plastics Treaty and some things that we can do to push this forward as an agenda item. So if plastics were a country, it would be the 5th largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, and emissions from the creation and use and disposal of plastics is expected to reach 56 gigatons, the 10 to 13% of the remaining carbon budget that we need to keep below in order to keep below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And more than half of global plastic production is from Asia. So this week, member states of the United Nations are set to decide on a global plastics treaty. In December last year, 700 groups from 113 countries called for a legally binding global instrument on plastic pollution, covering measures along the entire life cycle of plastics. This includes extraction of feedstocks, production, transport, use, disposal, and remediation. Governments and stakeholders are preparing for a mandate coming out of UNEA 5.2 to negotiate and adopt, we hope, an ambitious new agreement on plastics. Hopefully, this framework would contain specific and legally binding provisions and obligations to address plastic pollution and its impact. So we are bringing together a panel to discuss the idea of a global treaty on plastics, and we're joined by 4 distinguished speakers, and I'm going to introduce them and then I'll call on our first speaker. Hemantha Witthanga is our first speaker, and he is currently the Executive Director of the Centre for Environmental Justice in Sri Lanka and has been elected as Chair of Friends of the Earth International. I should also note that I joined many years ago Friends of the Earth International in New South Wales, I think back in the early 80s when I first became enthused about environmental issues. So it's a great pleasure, Hemantha, for you to be here. He is a graduate of the University of Kelaniya in Sri Lanka. He has joined the environmental justice movement in the 1990s as an environment officer for the Environmental Foundation Limited. And in 2004, he co-founded the Centre for Environmental Justice, the most visible environmental organisation in Sri Lanka today. He has also been an executive director of the Philippine-based NGO Forum on the Asian Development Bank, a network of civil society organisations monitoring the Asian Development Bank. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Hemantha here today. Our second speaker is Dr. Shahriar Hossain, and his organisation, Environment and Social Development Organisation, or ESDO, is a pioneer and the key personality of the global movement on plastic pollution. He has spent 13 years campaigning and lobbying against plastic bags and was the main architect to make Bangladesh the first country in the world to ban plastic bags in 2002. He has an MSc in Environmental Studies and a doctorate in Urban Ecology from Duke University in North Carolina. He is a fellow of the Centre for Environmental Studies, Duke and Ashoka Innovators for the Public. He's worked as a visiting faculty in Georgetown University, Washington, DC, and Bath University in the UK, and he's working as an external faculty and examiner of the Faculty of Social Science in the University of Dhaka. He's also working as a freelance environmental journalist, ecologist, and social justice advocate. Our third speaker, Carol Pilora, is the Plastics Campaigner Associate for GAIA Asia Pacific, working closely with GAIA member countries in influencing governments to support the Global Plastics Treaty. She has worked with the Philippine Environment Ministry and various environmental and human rights groups in the Philippines and in Asia. Her thematic areas of expertise are climate, extractives, and the plastics crisis. Before her professional work in the development sector, Carol was a grassroots volunteer organiser for about 5 years in a humanitarian organisation and 7 years in the local environment movement. In her spare time, if she has any, she mentors youth and environmental volunteers and is currently opening a zero waste store in her hometown. We are also privileged to have an intervention from Yunun Ismawati, who has more than 25 years of experience in environmental health and is advocating better chemicals and waste policies. In 2000, she co-founded Bali Focus, which was later rebranded as the Nexus 3 Foundation. She is also involved in steering committees in various member NGO networks at the national and global levels. Yuyun holds an environmental engineering bachelor's degree from Bandung Institute of Technology in Indonesia and a Master of Science in Environmental Change and Management from the University of Oxford. She's published various reports and scientific papers on chemicals and wastes, including plastic pollution. And in 2009, Yuyun received a Goldman Environmental Prize for her work on plastics and waste. So it's a great pleasure to have such a distinguished company here today to talk about what is clearly a very, very serious and ongoing issue. So can I say, as I introduce and welcome Hemantha to take the control of the screen, please, if you have any questions, please, you can use the question and answer button on the bottom of the screen. Participants are also able to upvote questions, and you'll be able to see questions that are to be answered, and we'll have half an hour, we hope, for questions at the end. And we can also, at the end of the presentations, raise your hand, and we can also call on you if you wish to make a short comment or ask a question to the panel. Thank you very much. And Hemantha, the screen, as they say, is yours.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm happy to speak about this situation at the national level as well as from the international and regional perspectives. I hope you can see my PowerPoint presentation. And I think...
yes, all good.
Yeah, and I think the issue for many of our countries started when China decided that so they don't want to import any more plastics, and it started dumping plastics in many of the Southeast Asian countries and also South Asian countries as well. And everybody knows that how big this issue, especially the packaging industry, is a huge problem. I think about 42% of the plastics are entering through the packaging industry. And in Sri Lanka, we have done several brand audits together with the Break Free from Plastic, and also with the IPEN and the support of GAIA time to time. And we found that Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Unilever, and these kind of FMCG companies are very much involved in this dumping plastic waste. And in countries like smaller countries, so they have tried many different approaches, including banning single-use plastics and bringing the extended producer responsibility. I think the extended producer responsibility has been talking few years back, about 2 decades ago in our countries. And I remember when we attended one of the meeting in Korea, so we visited a number of factories where so they bring all these electronic waste into those companies, but and dismantle them. But when it comes to the plastics, I think it was not the case in many of these countries. And the number of the volume is increasing almost double every 20 years. And Sri Lanka is infamous for dumping marine litter, and according to one of the World Bank report, Sri Lanka is in the number 5th place. I think Indonesia and some other countries are also in this list. But such a small country, Sri Lanka, as an island, how come so we are responsible for that much of plastic littering in the ocean? But what we found in Sri Lanka, that at least we have 103 rivers, and many of those plastics finally end up in becoming the ocean plastics. And we have seen in the recent pictures that some of the big fish, like the tuna, so they have full of stomach with plastics, huge plastics. So this plastic is is a major issue. And although we are talking about number of national level activities as well as the regional level activities, I know that European Union and the US governments, they're also supporting the businesses and some others to bring reduce the plastic pollution, but unfortunately that is not happening in Sri Lanka. In around the same time that Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, so they've been fighting on the waste trade. And in 2017, we found that Sri Lanka has imported also few containers of garbage, actually 263 containers we found in this particular case. In 2019, we filed the legal action against the company. These plastics and the waste came from the United Kingdom for sort of recycling, but unfortunately these material are not suitable for recycling. So it is violation of the Basel regulations. And in fact, Sri Lanka doesn't have a suitable policy framework for implementing the Basel Convention. So therefore, these gaps they use for bringing these kind of waste. So then we filed the legal action in 2019, and the court issued the order against the Customs Department and the Central Environmental Authority, which is the focal point for Basel, to repatriate all these waste containers back to the United Kingdom. And the last 45 containers actually sent 3 days ago. So it's a very fresh issue, and people have been talking about this plastic and the waste dumping in our countries. The one more recent issue is about the Express Pearl disaster. I think why we need a global treaty, a legally binding treaty. This one is a very good example. And in this particular ship, so there were more than 81 containers of very toxic chemicals, about 42 different type of chemicals, including heavy metals. But more importantly, it had 1,680 metric tons of plastic nodules and also 9,700 metric tons of epoxy resin. We are talking about 85 billion high density and low density polyethylene nodules. And it has spread more than 700 kilometers, affected more than 20,000 fishermen. And the authorities said only about 40% the plastic nodules reached to the coastline in Sri Lanka, but 60% has disappeared. So, and there were models that shows these plastics are now moving to Indonesia, Burma, Malaysia, and all these countries. So this is clear, and we are saying that plastic nodules normally don't decay for next 500 to 1,000 years, and this is a long-lasting issue for us, for many of our countries. And also, some of these plastics are now moving along the Adams Bridge, which is connecting Sri Lanka and India, and hopefully, so they will be appearing in the Indian coast as well. So the issue about this is not so simple. And in the recent times, we have done the test with the IPEN and Dr. Teresa Carlson and the CJ team members found that there are a lot of chemicals attached to these plastics. Now, this is the report, the cover page, and here you can see polyaromatic hydrocarbons are very high levels, and according to the European standards, for the adults it is 1,000 nanograms per gram, but we found 6,000 nanograms per gram, which is about 6 times higher than the European standard. In related to the children, it is 500 nanograms per gram, and this is about 12 times polyaromatic hydrocarbons. Now we are talking about polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which is very, very carcinogenic, and it is because of the burning of these plastics in the ship accident. And again, so we found very high levels, and also here we found the levels of bisphenol because of the epoxy resin 9,700 metric tons. So what we actually talking about, there are many disasters happening in this world, especially the smaller countries are suffering a lot because we, other than our own consumption, so we become the dumping ground. So therefore, I think I already told you that, so we have the national initiatives like the banning, extended producer responsibility, and also various other management mechanisms. But at the moment, we see a lot of incineration, open burning, ocean littering, and all these. And this cannot control without having a legally binding treaty. So I think in this case, the UNEA 5.2 is going to talk about two different proposals at least, but they might merge. The Rwanda-Peru proposal is talking about this whole life cycle approach. At the same time, it has a very comprehensive package, but Japanese proposal is not that that comprehensive. So I think during the next few days, so we will continue to argue why we need to have a legally binding treaty and why we need to have a life cycle approach, why we need to resolve this issue by handling the production, consumption, as well as the end of the life cycle approach. So without that, so it is not easy. And without legally binding treaty, definitely the corporations will manipulate the whole national legislation in order to continue to pollute, so which we cannot allow happen. So I hope that's at the beginning. I want to share this information. I believe with the after listening to the rest of the speakers, so we will have a better understanding about what is happening with this global conference, which is going to happen, which is already started in Nairobi. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed, Hemantha. And more importantly, I think that puts some of this in context. I mean, the Express Pearl tragedy was sort of the latest in and highlighted, you know, this issue about the nurdles and the issues about toxic chemicals. I mean, I've also been fortunate to work with the EU and the UN Environment Programme on a number of waste programs relating to transboundary illegal waste under Basel Convention and looking at the prosecutions. And even there, with a very strong convention and treaty, those challenges about implementation remain. So I think, thank you, Hemantha, for that very, very great introduction. And we now move on to our second speaker, who's looking at a comparison of Japan and Rwanda resolutions at the UN Environment Assembly, and that's Dr. Shahriar Hossain, the Secretary General, Environment and Social Development Organization. So please, the screen is now yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthews. I'm just sharing my screen. I'm just checking my screen is edible.
Yes, thank you very much. All good.
Thank you. So I'm trying to sum up the comparison of the Japan and Rwanda-Peru resolution on plastic treaty. So if we can see the beginning of the resolution, the two draft resolutions are on marine litter and plastic pollution, which is currently tabled to discuss the Committee of the Permanent Representative session, which is ongoing from 21st of February until tomorrow. So the committee will recommend this resolution to the UNEA 5.2 for adoption. And as we know that the first resolution submitted by the Rwanda-Peru resolution in September 2021, and Japan submitted 6 December 2021. 21. The global treaty, in aspects of the comparison, we can see that both resolutions have some key points. I'm trying to spell out the key area of the convergence. They both call for quick negotiation in the lead up to UNEA 6. That means the next UNEA would be at the beginning of the negotiation process. So the both are specific on the need of the global legally binding instrument and convening the Intergovernmental Negotiation Committee to negotiate one. The common elements across the both resolutions on thinking like national action plan, cooperation, technical support, research, and innovation. Japan highlights the transboundary nature of the concern. Rwanda, Peru does it too, but under the PP4. Open-minded versus closed mandate in the two resolutions. The Rwanda-Peru draft resolution contained more specific guidance on the elements and design of a treaty, while also commenting an open mandate wherever the INC may be considered, and other aspects of the Intergovernmental Negotiation Committee may consider relevance. That means the Rwanda-Peru is clearly focused on the INC, the Intergovernmental Negotiation Committee, that to be focused on the treaty negotiation process. In Japan draft, resolution contained different aspects of the element designed while also contained close mandate, where INC is not allowed to consider other relevant aspects. There's a big difference with these two resolutions. So the Rwanda-Peru resolution is more open to the process of the negotiation, but the Japan is still closed on the INC process. Plastic pollution versus marine plastic pollution. Rwanda-Peru seek the address of plastic pollution in all environment and the life cycle approach. The Japan focuses on marine plastic pollution. So they are more confined with the marine. Life cycle approach versus downstream focus. Rwanda-Peru resolution promotes the full life cycle approach with which intervention to the production, designing, waste management. That means the whole life cycle of the plastic. The Japan refers to the plastic life cycle, but includes more emphasis on the downstream interventions. Monitoring discharge in the marine environment, the global reduction marine plastic pollution by 2050. 2050, that is the national action plan and their nature of predominantly content measures of the waste management. Japan does not include OPO2 on sustainable production and OPO2C on product design for the Rwanda-Peru resolution. So there is two different aspects. The Rwanda-Peru resolutions is emphasis on the product design, which is not in the Japan's resolutions. strong institutional frames versus weak institutional framework. Rwanda-Peru resolution require consideration of the key aspects related to the institutional framework, including the financial mechanism and scientific and socioeconomic aspects, implementation of the treaty. This is not included in Japan resolution. Key difference, Japan specifies 3 dimensions of the sustainable development. Rwanda-Peru makes its link with the Sustainable Development Goals and anticipated target for 14.1 goal. This is not included in Japan resolution. Japan highlights the urgent to strengthen the science policy, interface, and understanding of the impact. Rwanda-Peru does not mention the science policy interface. Japan does not include UNEA resolution 4/7 on environmentally sound management of the West and 4/9 on addressing single-use plastic products pollution, which are included in Rwanda-Peru. So in the present scenario, this is a very important issue of the single-use plastic pollution. And these resolutions are different with the both of the Rwanda-Peru and Japan's. Other key differences, Japan mentioned life cycle, but does not include the ROP, OP2B that mentioned sustainable production, consumption, address the product design. And for the life cycle, they are mentioning the life cycle, but they are not addressing the whole life cycle. This is the difference between the Japan and Rwanda-Peru resolution. Rwanda-Peru resolutions focuses on the whole life cycle of the plastic, but Japan is specific on the marine pollution and its waste. Rwanda-Peru has additional which provided direction to guide discussion, legal instrument, particular prevention, specific financial mechanism, and socioeconomic aspects. Japan does not include these specific decisions. The things is that the Global Plastic Treaty, the plastic pollution state guiding momentum in 2014, when the problem of marine litter and microplastic was first brought up by Norway at the UN Environment Assembly first session in Nairobi, and Japan was the first country to support this issue. Unfortunately, Japan is moving little backward with their commitment in 2014. But this is good things to know that now more than 120 countries in favor of the legally binding treaty with the life cycle of the plastic approaches. So in these 2 resolutions, we know that there are some definitely the good points of the Japanese resolutions. So the decision will definitely taken in comparison, and some of the resolution is combined with one resolution. So we are optimistic and hope that the Permanent Representation Committee will recommend a comprehensive approach of the resolution to the UNEA, and it will begin the INC process quickly. And finally, I believe that all of our reports together, we will begin soon with the process of the INC. And for all of your information, if this UNEA accepted this resolution and INC process, it will not instead begin from tomorrow. It will take time of the longer process, and the negotiation process will start hopefully from the UNEA 6. So we have to go long way to achieve the plastic treaty. So my request to all of you, this is the beginning of the process. We have to be more collective and joint efforts to move forward for a legally binding treaty. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you very much indeed, Dr. Sharia Hossain, for that overview. And I think that that's also, the very important point that we are at the point where if the resolution is successful, then there will be a lot more opportunities for discussion and engagement, and it's really the beginning of the process in some ways. So thank you again very much for that. And we've already got some very good questions. Again, can I ask people if they'd like to put their questions in the Q&A box? And we also have a couple of hand raisers for questions when we get to the question and answer after Union's intervention. So our next speaker, Carol Pelora from the Plastics Campaign, Associate for Asia and the Pacific for the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. Thank you very much indeed, Carol. The screen is now yours.
Thank you, Matthew. Can you hear me well?
We can, yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you, Colleen. Okay, so for my part here, we're going to be talking about impacts and opportunities in Southeast Asia. So from the global perspective that the two speakers have shared earlier, so I have three things in my presentation. So first is, why is there a need for a global plastic treaty and how will it affect the Southeast Asian region? Second is, what are the opportunities for CSOs and governments in influencing and making the most out of this treaty? And third one is existing recommendations and capacities needed by member groups and countries. So for the third one, I am referring to the GAIA network. So we have country members. So coming from consultations, I'll be sharing their recommendations later on. All right, so up to the next slide. Why is there a need for a global plastic treaty? So Southeast Asia is a diverse region, struggling with various challenges caused by plastic throughout its entire life cycle. So different studies indicate that several Asian countries are among the top polluting countries due to plastic waste mismanagement and continued leakage to the environment. The contribution to global plastic waste is driven by multiple factors such as high plastic production and consumption, lack of sufficient waste management infrastructure, and plastic waste trade. So Asia represents 50% of the global plastic production, with China being the largest plastic producer, generating 20% of the world's plastic production. All right, next slide, please. Nowhere is the need for action greater than in Asia, which is the source of over 80% of the plastic that ends up in the world's ocean. Okay, next slide. All right, if you can see here, one of the top emitters of plastic to the ocean 81% is coming from Asia, and that's a very big percentage. And next slide. The region is also seriously impacted by plastic waste imports. Until recently, our previous speakers have also mentioned that China was the largest importer of plastic waste until it imposed a ban in 2018, which resulted in a diversion of the waste that was exported to China to other countries, predominantly in Southeast Asia. In 2018, as we can see here, Malaysia became the world's top destination for plastic waste, with about more than 850,000 tons of plastic waste, including municipal waste, was shipped that year from the European Union, Japan, US, and UK to the country. So this led to a sharp rise in illegal recycling facilities and dump sites, causing land, water, and air pollution that affected several communities nationwide. Plastic pollution also has economic costs in Asian countries due to damages of fishing boats, declining numbers of tourists. Also, developing countries in Asia bear a disproportionate share of waste management costs due to imports from high-income countries. So the story played out in much the same way in other countries, so Indonesia, India, Thailand, and Vietnam. So what can be done about this? We need a systematic change in the form of an international agreement and policies to stop to excessive plastic production, use, and disposal worldwide. So other than plastic waste trade, we also have other challenges, including waste collection, which range from low to moderate. Also, there is a strong focus on downstream solutions, including recycling, especially in policies which are being proposed in Southeast Asian countries, including EPR, or the Extended Producer's Responsibility Bills. Another one is corporations and governments giving focus on false solutions or greenwashing. This includes incineration, cement kilns, plastic neutrality or plastic offsets, and the likes. And also corporate-driven narratives that sachets and single-use plastics are cheap, convenient, and safe. All right, next slide. So why is a plastic treaty relevant to Southeast Asia? It is because it's going to talk and tackle the issues that I shared before. And here's like a quick bullet of it: plastic pollution, waste trade, climate, toxics, bad waste management and false solutions, sustainable livelihood, and just transition. So what opportunities are there for CSOs and governments in Southeast Asia? So the first one we have an existing ASEAN, next slide please. ASEAN Regional Action Plan for Combating Marine Debris in the ASEAN member states. So this is already an existing roadmap for ASEAN. And despite the challenges, the action plan will be implemented over the next 5 years. And it's going to highlight many opportunities to catalyze, collaborate, and apply long-term solutions relating to plastics usage and plastic management. So the Regional Action Plan has an overall commitment to tackle the challenge by reducing plastic inputs into the system, enhancing collection and minimizing leakage, as well as creating value for waste reuse. So actions include guidelines for countries to phase out single-use plastics, harmonize regional policies on recycling and plastics packaging standards, and strengthen regional measurement and monitoring of marine debris. So the ASEAN roadmap for addressing marine litter. But we are also looking at dialogues with CSOs and governments and a monitoring mechanism to ensure that it's inclusive and that we can share practices that are already working in the region. So the ASEAN action plan is something that we can leverage on and align with the Global Plastics Treaty that we are pushing for. Next opportunity is on the National Plastic Action Partnerships. Basically, these are the national action plans, which governments are ought to develop on how they're going to go about the plastics treaty or how they're going to implement it in their own countries, and what targets and what elements do they want to include. So there are opportunities for CSOs to engage with governments in the formulation of the National Plastic Action Partnerships. So right now, a few countries have already formulated a draft of their NPAPs that includes Indonesia, Ghana, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Vietnam. And CSOs also have a role in ensuring that corporations' presence in these multi-stakeholder platforms do not lead to critical compromises. All right, next slide. So in terms of messaging, what are our main messaging and what are our goals for the Plastics Treaty in Southeast Asia? So here are some examples that we have from GAIA. So for policymakers, we want to build public pressure for a mandate for a binding treaty covering the plastics life cycle, and hold the red lines and influence the negotiations. As we mentioned earlier, it's not only governments and CSOs which are present in these consultations, but also industries. So they can also lobby and influence the results of the treaty. So we have to manage those and make sure that our targets are well communicated. So for media in the local, regional, and global, we want to establish GAIA as a go-to resource for media on plastics policy and ensure Global South voices are centered in the conversation around the plastics treaty. And for allies and members, support our members to engage directly with their national governments and coordinate or engage with strategic groups to attract attention to the issue. All right, next slide. So this one is just a bit of a guidance for organizations or individuals who want to act or support the call for a global plastics treaty. So you can find out your country's position. So if your country is already supportive of it, there's probably no need for like a heavy pressure. But if your country is still not on the list of those who are supporting either of the resolutions, then that's a window for us to engage with your local government. All right, we also, so my slide has the links for these documents. I think Ariel will be sharing it with you guys. So for the second point, you can also find out who your national representatives are. So you can send them an email or a message calling for the support to support the treaty. Same goes with the third point. Can go to the next slide. Yes, next slide, please. All right. So in terms of advocacy and campaigning, we have produced communications toolkits and resources that can help everyone lobby and amplify the messages that we have and our non-negotiables to our representatives. So we have the advocacy toolkit that was formed by GAIA, and then there's another one from Break Free from Plastics. We also have a draft or a template for the petitions and the manifesto that was signed by different organizations globally. Also a few fact sheets on different themes and elements of the treaty. And we also have here the key messages and the sample letter that you can share to your community. Next slide. Another opportunity for coordination and collaboration is the UNEA Global Task Force. So right now they are very busy with February 28th coming close. So you may send an email or contact the Center for International Environmental Law, as they are the one who's coordinating and hosting this task force. So there are regular and monthly calls for updates and sharing of ideas and exchanging, like updating everyone what's going on in their countries and in the region and globally. So if you are interested and would like to get in touch, please email Jane Patton. So she's the one who's coordinating the Global Task Force. All right, next. So GAIA has already held 2 member consultations in the region. And this is Asia Pacific, not only Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. All right, and next. All right, so these are just photos from the consultation. Next one. All right, so what are we looking for in a treaty? So this came from our members. So we want a legally binding treaty that addresses the impacts in the full life cycle of plastics and not only marine debris or marine plastic pollution. Bring the voices of waste pickers. We want a stronger EPR with clear upstream targets and not only downstream. We want the coverage of the whole life cycle of plastics and a clear language against false solutions such as incineration, chemical recycling, among others. So just a few points from the consultation. So these are recommendations from the members. So we want a legislation that assigns and defines a sort of monitoring that starts with the public sector. We want real structures for reuse and refill supply chains. A financing taxonomy, but on plastic-related funding. A space for us in national action plans to have an affirmative list of the kind of investments that countries want to see that addresses the climate issue, not just countries, but even entities like the World Bank. For my last slide, members want a just transition for waste pickers and waste workers, and more emphasis on source segregation, the removal of toxics in plastic production, and to address segregation at source and waste recycling. Intensified campaign for public awareness and inclusion of plastic pollution discussions in education systems, and a digitized or technology innovations for timely and more accurate plastic waste data collection and monitoring. So that ends my presentation. Back to you, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Carol, and especially thank you very much for the action points. And so we'll share the presentations with everyone, and that will have the links. Although if during the course of this afternoon you have any links that you want to post in the chat box, please feel free. I was trying to find if we had the link about what countries' positions are, and I certainly think, you know, this is where it's an interesting situation that even if there is an approval to go forward, how that treaty may, you know, and what that treaty may include is still very, very important. I mean, if it just does focus on a particular part of the life cycle of the plastics, or it allows, as you point, those greenwashing, and because I think that's also something, and there are a number of questions about some of the issues in terms of the how to deal with plastic and plastic waste. And certainly I know from my experience working on Basel Convention issues and looking at waste crimes for transboundary waste, people point to the decision by China to stop allowing the import of waste. And some people raise this as an issue, but of course what it did do is it highlighted the enormous amount of waste that was going from industrialized countries, you know, to China, that it was becoming the dumping ground for waste. It was really demonstrating that this was an issue that we just hadn't addressed, this whole life cycle approach to plastics. Perhaps it's not unusual. We often ignore the whole life cycle approach to our environmental problems, whether it's climate change, palm oil, plastics, nuclear energy, or indeed how we resolve those environmental issues using some other form of technology that does produce its own consequences. So look, thank you very much indeed for that presentation. So we have some questions, and thank you. We have some hands being raised. The final sort of formal part is that I would like to ask Yu Yun to provide a short intervention and observation from her position. And indeed, thank you very much for joining us from London and a very early morning to you. So terima kasih for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Okay. Thank you for the speakers, the earlier speakers that already put some foundations of the discussions and our concerns. I'd like to add more concern from my side and different perspective. I'd like to share my presentation from my side. Okay, can you see this? Okay. Excuse me. Okay, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Yu Yun Ismawati. I'm from Nexus 3 Foundation, as Matthew already explained earlier. My organization is called Nexus 3 Foundation now, but previously, maybe you know me from the Bali Focus Foundation. We are affiliated to several networks, including Break Free from Plastic, GAIA, IPEN, and other networks. And in Indonesia, we are also co-founder of the Alliance for Zero Waste Indonesia. Our works are targeting of plastic life cycle from the upstream to downstream. And most of our reports also are available on our websites. And the recent publications or reports that we released just this week is about plastic burden and the chemicals in plastics in products that we analyze, especially from Indonesia, Russia, and China. It's a collaboration with IPEN, Eco Accord, and Zero Waste Shenzhen. You can also find our reports on toxic pollutions in food chains, especially on chicken eggs, which prove that the chemicals in plastics do not disappear, although you burn it. And I would like to start from the upstream. These discussions about the global treaty should also address first and foremost the upstream level. We have to cap the production and the extraction of fossil fuel, and also the gasification of coal and all kinds of modifications of coal that will support or provide cheap energy for the plastic industry and petrochemical industry. And we know that in the process, especially when fracking is introduced as the unconventional gas extraction method, hundreds of chemicals being used in fracking, and that immediately contaminated the environment and the communities around the extraction sites. In my country, and I believe in other countries as well, petrochemical industry enjoy tax holidays 100% for 20 years, like in Indonesia, or probably in other countries, they have a shorter enjoyment of tax holidays. It's tricky because in some countries are now the discussions about plastic tax already been around and discussed, but very little attention addressed to taxing the petrochemical industry. That's at the top and the upstream. As Kirill already mentioned, and also Hemanta earlier, that Asia produce more than half of the world's plastics. And this is coming from China, Japan, and the rest of Asia, Thailand, Indonesia. Unfortunately, we also are importing a lot of plastic waste, and it's more than half of the global plastic waste, as we know. So this will not be stopped unless we stop the production or reduce the production of plastics and the petrochemical industry. And with this amount, we cannot quantify enough or calculate, and data not available enough to present how much chemicals, toxic chemicals, are actually incorporated into this and associated to this plastic waste. In the middle stream, based on our findings and our study, we also found a lot of toxic chemicals, which is some of them already discussed and controlled under the Stockholm Convention, but many of them are still unknown and under research or overlooked. Because some chemicals only show their impact after a period of time, after 5 years and so on. If you remember PFAS, dark waters case, you will find it only after 15 years and regulated or prohibited after 20 years. So it's important to curb the impact of plastics to human health and the environment, including at the middle stream stage or during the manufacturing. Some plastics, chemicals or plastic additives are already prohibited and controlled. And the new one is coming up. For instance, the UV328, that's widely used in plastic products. PBDEs, BFR, BPA already also controlled under the Stockholm Convention. And within the Basel Convention, the transboundary movement of plastic waste also already addressed some of the cured plastics. And during COVID time, there are a lot of discussions about allowing health PPEs and health equipment still made out of plastics. And these have to be justified. What kind of essential uses that we will still allow the society to use. But also important to identify the non-essential uses, for instance, the single-use plastics, cups and so on, that many countries already agreed to eliminate it, also have to be promoted and advancing. And another important highlight here is the EPR. Many EPR programs do not have, legal hook where this money will be allocated to the national budget when the money paid by consumers as a plastic tax or users of plastic bags it should be a clear pathways and framework how that tax can be reused or redistributed for public purposes. And EPR, this is the challenge, that the EPR applied for manufacturers, probably barcodes and link to the name of the company, and that also will be interesting to see, as some people already address it and raise the issue. But most importantly, take back deposits, returns, and so on, and need to be more promoted. And some producers or FMCGs already have the refill programs for certain products, but this need to be expanded and pushed more. In the middle stream also, before going to the downstream, we talk about recycling and recycling rates. And also some countries have been identified to have mismanaged of plastic waste. But if we see the dots here, for instance, in the US and in the EU countries, it said that almost 100% or 70% of their waste already managed. But is it really managed in the country, or sending it to the red area on the right side? So we have mismanaged waste in developing countries because of lack of finance and lack of enforcement. But this is, as Kali already mentioned also about the ocean pollution and river plastics, highlighted in several research papers. This is not only generated from its country, but also adding the burden is coming from the waste trade or exportation, importation cases. So we have to really review the recycling purposes of certain plastic products. At the downstream level, we also found a lot of high concentrations of dioxins and then PBDEs and PFAS in many, in the soil and then in the air and in the food chain. These contribute to the release of toxic chemicals, the handle of how developing countries handling this plastic waste contributed to the burden of the environment. And it's important to highlight and identify the non-circular plastics. And some plastics have to be prohibited to be produced since the beginning, like PVC. And then how they can be safely disposed of. Many electronic waste with plastic products containing a lot of harmful chemicals, and this have to be separated from the municipal waste. The export of plastic waste are now changing shapes, as not only in form of solid plastic waste or paper scrap, but now shifting the shape into PEF, RDF for fuel. So this is a new way to export waste that we have observed in Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, looking from Australia, because the new policy of Australia in addressing or tackling waste export is to convert it into RDF. So this kind of evolution of a strategy also ongoing, and that have to be accommodated in the treaty, because even if country have a strategy to address the waste management in their at the national level, they still have to think further until 2050. And anticipating various evolution of policy and strategies. I would like to recommend many countries, especially in Southeast Asia, to allocate more fund for infrastructures and also monitoring of plastics, as mentioned also by previous speakers, especially on laboratories capacity. Many of these samples that we analyze, we cannot analyze it in Indonesia because of a lack of infrastructure. So we have to send the samples abroad. And if we are going to have a stronger treaty, if we want to have a stronger treaty, the capacity in every country also should be increased and improved, including laboratory supports. Thank you for listening and looking forward to have a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Union, for that overview. And it shows obviously how important it is to look at this, in that holistic manner. I mean, again, just that slide about we give petroleum companies subsidies to get out the petroleum products. And then we talk about a 1 cent tax on a plastic bag, and the petroleum companies say, well, it's not mine. I've also been at the UNC of Solutions workshops where the plastic industry have said, look, we're not the polluter. The consumer is responsible. If the consumer didn't buy our plastic products, we wouldn't pollute, which of course is exactly a comment about industry and trying to avoid what we would say is its clear obligation. So can I now ask everyone from the panel to join us and turn on the cameras? We have a number of questions, and I'm going to go first to someone who's raised their hand. Hock on Ku, are you there? And would you be able to, can we, I think we can allow you to talk, and if you wanted to turn on your microphone and ask your question. Are you there? Maybe we can come back. So yes, so Hokanku, if you are there and can.
Hello,
yes.
Can you hear me?
We are getting a lot of feedback, but.
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure that, okay, there's no feedback now. I'm just wondering, from there are two levels here, one at the national level and the global level. Will the global treaty take away emphasis from efforts at the national level? That's some of the arguments being made by proponents at the national level, that's one. And will the global plastic treaty cover the plastic producers from the production of raw material, and to see if targets could be set to reduce consumption or usage of the raw material, which is basically the resins. There are only about 5 major resin producers in the world, pumping their resins to manufacturers, as you might have referred to, and they create the momentum for plastic production and of course usage. Would the plastic treaty refer to that? Upstream, I know the Japan resolution doesn't emphasize it as much as the Rwanda-Peru one resolution, but which is likely to see the upstream being adopted or being moderated more, if not controlled or reduced. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to?
Okay, can I?
Please.
So this is make sure that this resolution is a proposal, and this resolution is little guidelines that to the treaty negotiation process, and it is not the final things. So if the UNEA approved, the first UNEA have to approve that they are willing to kick off this process of the global plastic treaty, then they have to approve for intergovernmental negotiation process, that is INC. And the INC will be the mandate, will have to be the mandate to discuss this matter and this issue. And these issues definitely come up from the national level. And the parties, the government will raise the issue, and they have to be the opportunity to talk about their country position in the negotiation process. So this is too early to predict or comment about what's happening in future. But if we can look at to the two resolutions, and we can say that most of the countries support for the legally binding treaty. And if it is legally binding treaty, then the negotiation process definitely will be very tough. And even here, I'm here, and we are experienced with the many negotiation process of UN. And recent, we can mention that the Minamata Convention. And our journey from the beginning of the negotiation process, and we see how it's turned to right and left, and finally to the compromise position. So according to that experience, I believe that definitely we have to move to the negotiation process first. And most of the party, those who are saying right now that they are supporting the global legally binding treaty, even US supporting the legally binding treaty right now, we don't know in the negotiation table how they react in different way. So in consideration of the any worse situation in coming future, the civil society movement should need to be the united and act properly. If we can act properly, definitely we will achieve. This is my point.
So Carol, perhaps I can ask a follow-up question about that. That sort of leads back to the toolkits that you've provided, that the important thing is to still ensure that even if the governments support a plastics treaty, what the content and how that may develop. I mean, will we see more NGO mobilization working with individual countries or groups of countries? I guess we've seen that also in the climate change negotiations, to develop a stronger or a comprehensive plastics treaty.
Yes, definitely organizations are very much involved, and we're trying to well, the nature of GAIA, since we are an alliance, so we have member organizations across the globe and in Asia Pacific. So we are definitely giving them support, and also asking their opinion and their inputs on what their non-negotiables are. And it's a developing process. So definitely as changes arise in the negotiations, we'll also try to strategize and push for our non-negotiables, definitely, as an alliance. But for, like, let's say for organizations like Greenpeace, so they're just one organization. So they whatever their mandate is, that's what they're gonna stand for. So yes, definitely through the task force and through the global groups and networks, we will be consolidating like a more comprehensive stand for different CSOs.
And there was a question also in the Q&A about what are the red lines of GAIA? What are some of those red lines or some of those non-negotiables?
Yeah, so going back to my slide earlier. All right, just give me a moment. So I've mentioned like what are we looking for in a treaty. So these are some of our red lines. So one, it has to be legally binding, and it addresses the impacts of the full life cycle of plastics, not just marine plastic litter. So we want to bring the voices of waste pickers and include a just transition scheme. Stronger EPR with clear upstream targets. Right now, we're seeing a lot of downstream proposals. And a clear language against false solutions, including incineration.
Thank you. I just getting to a couple more of those questions. We have a comment from Narayan Joshi about the role that the improper disposal of plastic waste plays on the natural environment is increasingly being criticised on the part due to the volume of waste visible, and the inability of plastics to degrade at a reasonable rate also plays an important role. And there's a follow-up specific question about what is life cycle assessment framework. So maybe someone could comment on that. But I also think, is it, just as an interesting question for everyone's comments, we've seen this enormous growth in action on plastics. And as someone who, I think with Amantha at some of the Environmental Law Alliance Worldwide conferences 30 years ago, people were talking about plastics and chemicals. Rachel Carson's book, published 54 years ago, talked about, the silent spring and the impact of chemicals. And I see now that only in the last few years, perhaps, or maybe half a dozen years, we've seen this very significant increase in a focus on plastics. And I wonder in a way that Narayan has pointed out, that it's because it's now become so visible. We can no longer ship it off to China. We can no longer pump it into our rivers and our oceans, that it is becoming. Is that something that is really going to drive action, because this has now become that plastic sea, the Pacific plastics patch and so forth? So I'd also be interested in your comments, but if someone could also address that specific question, what is the life cycle assessment framework?
Yeah, okay, I can just address the life cycle and definitely follow with Ewan will follow up the others one, and Hemanta. So the life cycle approach is from the extraction, the raw material acquisition process, and then production, fabrication, that means end product, packaging, distribution, then use, and end of the life, that waste. After the waste, and recycling. So this is the whole life cycle framework. And we believe that the whole life cycle framework is a toxic journey. Ewan, please add.
Thank you. So anyone would like to make a comment about just why we've seen this increasing focus on plastics? I mean, ASEAN's action plan on marine litter happened almost overnight in an ASEAN context, where usually the glacier melt is even happening faster than ASEAN's. So Amantha, Union?
Yeah, actually, I want to share some thoughts about this question. The first thing, I think unlike number of other conventions, plastic is very much infamous, and we have seen the negative impacts across the world, from land to the ocean, from humans to the other animals. And it is, and countries have been trying to tackle this issue for many, many decades, but failed. I think I remember Bangladesh, especially Dhaka, banned, thanks to ESDO, I think work, that time banned the shopping bags, the high density polyethylene bags in 90s, So now 30 years later, now we are coming to the global level. In Sri Lanka, we have first discussed about bringing 30 different guidelines, including banning in 1993, actually. So that's a very beginning of this. But we didn't do anything unless it became a so big crisis. Now this has become a crisis for the countries like United States, to the smallest countries in this world. So now everybody is trying, they are putting a lot of money into tackle, a lot of big agencies are putting, but this kind of treaty would have come at least about 15, 20 years ago. Unfortunately, it was not the case. So I think this is a very good momentum at the moment that we don't have to do much to convince, but we have to convince people what solutions, what technological solutions, what tools we can use, what economic tools we can use, etc. I think that is what I think the political will is the one that so we want to look at this international level. So I think if this resolution get passed, I think coming to a sort of a the agreement is not impossible. But at the same time, I think people are so much addicted to plastic, and there's no much alternatives. World has been developed. So I think in this case, people have to do a lot of attitude changes and also find the suitable alternatives, and reduction doesn't mean that only the banning can happen. So I think the implementation part would be harder. But I think everyone is understand the seriousness compared to for example, we have other conventions like this strategic approach to international sound chemical management. We are talking about too many things, but it is a harder job. But in this particular case, I think it's easier.
Thank you. Yes.
Add a bit. Yes. I think it's life cycle assessment is looking at how long a product can be used or will be useless, and then compare it with other materials. However, some life cycle analysis do not include the chemicals in the analysis because it's so complex. And this is coming to the other question about how civil society and academia can have a stronger capacity against the oil lobbies. I think it's also linked to my recommendations about increasing the capacity for monitoring, including laboratories, because if we don't have evidence, it's difficult to fight the giants. So we need to collect more evidence and then work together, scientists from developed countries helping developing countries until we have sufficient or sophisticated laboratories to show and demonstrate that the impact of plastics and the toxic chemicals to our health are already irreversible. Dr. Shana Son just published her book last year, highlighting that the sperm count in developed countries in the UK, in the US and Europe are declining. And by 2045, it could be down to zero. So how can we find out about this if we don't have sufficient laboratory to demonstrate it? And if we know what's going on in our bodies, not only in developing countries, but not only in developed countries, but also in developing countries, we will be awake, I guess, because this is non-communicable diseases, silent killers that will not be able to see in a short period of time. So if we link it up with health, and I hope the treaty also will address health aspects of plastics, that will a wake-up call for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to now call on Kun Apachai. Would you like to turn on your microphone and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting. Okay, and since our focus of this discussion today is on Southeast Asia, I mean, and it has been mentioned by Carol that we do have an ASEAN action plan on marine litter, but I don't think that they have made the additional step to come to a treaty, right? So far, it's just an action plan. Now, in ASEAN, where I used to work, we have only one environmental treaty that is on the books. And this is the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution, which I had a little role in playing, in its inception. And in fact, coming this June, will be the 20th anniversary of that agreement. Now, if just to provide a little bit of reality check that, after 20 years, I think we still have the problem with us. The treaty, well, yes and no. It helps somewhat in moving forward a little bit, but it hasn't moved as far as we would like to. I mean, from an environmental or health or any other point of view, right? So I'm just providing a word of caution. I mean, it's good to move on towards a more legally binding instrument in most, and if not all cases, including, let's say, on marine litter or plastics. But just to, to be a bit sober and have a reality check, maybe it might be good if you want to move towards a plastics treaty, which of course I encourage as an environmentalist, but learn from the Haze Agreement. Why has it not moved as far as it could? What are the obstacles? What are the challenges, right? I mean, it's just like any other global environmental agreements, right? I mean, you can say it's glass half full or glass empty. In fact, recently I was part of a team that reviewed, the Haze Treaty also had a roadmap, a 5-year roadmap, just like the plastics one, except this one was from 2015 to 2020. And the outcome, I mean, roughly speaking, is that you have only achieved half of your roadmap, and that's just the roadmap for the last 5 years. So as far as the treaty is concerned, it's still, I mean, if you want my frank opinion, it's sort of, partial full and partial empty, right? So maybe it might be good to sort of, since I think we have lawyers in the discussion here, just to take a look back at the only environmental agreement of ASEAN to see what has not worked, especially, and then how do we overcome that in, let's say, if you want to move on toward a new treaty.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much. And I guess that's also one of those issues about the international treaty and how, would there be regional approaches, do you think, within that? Is that, and if anyone would like to comment on that?
Okay, so every negotiation process is coming from the national level. So we should consider, we should think about that the national level is the basis of any discussion, negotiation. And then it's moved to the regional level. So any negotiation process ultimately focus on the region. Because if we can think about the region, every region have their own modalities and differences. Asia Pacific is the largest region, but within the Asia Pacific, we have 4 sub-regions. And each of the sub-region have their own problems and own cultural barriers. So if we are not considering this sub-regional aspect, no negotiation will come up with the consensus. So this is about my experience with the many negotiation process, that easily the European region come up with the consensus. Why? Europe by population is a small region. So, and they have the money power. They have the knowledge and technologies power, so that they don't suffer with the poverty, unemployment, and the money, which other regions suffer. So Europe can come up with a common decision quickly, but Asia Pacific cannot. the GRULAC region cannot, because they have a lot of the sub-regional conflict of interest and problem. So they are not come up with a common solution. So this is definitely a challenge for any negotiation process, but I am very much optimistic with the future negotiation and the plastic treaty, because I see there are a lot of the Stockholm Convention, Minamata Conventions, there is a lot of barriers, but now it's slowly moving. It's moving, it's acting. So, and the Minamata Convention is the only convention in the UN process is ratified very quickly. You can imagine that 138 countries already ratified out of 193.
So that means, yeah.
That means it's moving. So, but as an activist, as a member of the civil society movement, we have to be very optimistic. We have to be committed. We have to find the loopholes and raise the voice of public.
So thank you. Look, I notice the time. I'm just hoping we can just continue for another 10 minutes because there are a few interesting questions, and then I'd like to give you all an opportunity to sort of make a conclusion. But we also have a question that's been raised by Remy Kinnard, who is a legal officer with the Watercourses Convention, and I think this also provides some interesting things. So, Remy, are you there? Are you able to?
Can you hear me, Matthew?
I can hear you.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for this really interesting discussion. So yeah, I work for the Secretariat of the Water Convention based in Geneva. And my question is that given the high percentage of marine plastics that come from rivers, especially from transboundary rivers, I'm wondering how much this treaty will integrate or promote synergies with the UN Global Water Conventions and the role of river basin organizations. The conventions themselves contain core international law principles on prevention, control, and reduction of pollution, joint monitoring and assessment, and other such international law principles. And that would all be really relevant for integrating a comprehensive legal framework that deals with source to sea pollution, specifically on marine plastics. And what we're seeing is that there are projects that are already focusing on this, such as UNEP's countermeasure project focusing on the Mekong and the Ganges, and also in South Asia, the South Asian, let me get the name correct, the South Asian Cooperative Environment Program. They already have a program focused on the Ganges funded by the World Bank, which is looking at plastics pollution as well. So I'm just wondering, we're talking about a global framework convention on plastics. We have a global framework convention on water, freshwater, on transboundary watercourses and international lakes. And I just wonder how much of this would be integrated or at least synergies explored to create that comprehensive legal regime to combat plastics pollution in the marine environment because of its connection to transboundary rivers as a source of marine pollution. Thank you.
Thanks, Remy.
I just wanted to respond because the Remy raised the transboundary river, the source of marine pollution. It's not true. It's not true, 100% not true. It's definitely partially true. The river definitely carrying a lot of the plastic waste. I just wanted to make sure that I am involved with the study with the Ganges River to the Bay of Bengal. And we have definitely found the plastic is coming from India through the Ganges basin. But the percentage, how percentage of the plastic waste from the Ganges River to the Bay of Bengal, it is less than 20%. That means the river transboundary river is threatened for the land-based pollution. It's carrying a lot of the waste and it sweeps up to the land-based areas. During the flood and monsoon, all of the rivers in Bangladesh, in India, overflowed. And the water moves around the cultivable land. And after the water goes down, the waste are dumped in the agricultural land. So we have to have the proper science-based solution. We cannot predict only. We have the proof that this river carrying this amount of the plastic. We cannot go for hypothesis. And we know, everyone knows that how much plastic waste dumped to the ocean directly. There are a lot of waste carrying vessels coming through the Pacific to the Bay of Bengal, Indian Oceans. They dump their waste directly to the ocean. So we should not be convinced with the driven study. We should find the real study. We should not go for the false solution and make sure that we cannot accept at one point the prescription from the World Bank. Thank you.
Thank you. And Carol, I mean, I think your slides also indicated that rivers were a source, or at least a carrying of plastics. I thought you had a slide up there.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yes, it showed that most of the polluted rivers can be found in Asia. But if you actually read the study where the graph was based, it also says that these rivers, there are a lot of factors that should be considered, including the kind of environment that's surrounding those rivers. So let's say for the Philippines, a lot of poor communities where there's very low waste management systems and ineffective waste collection. So those are just some of the factors that affect the amount of waste that can be found in these rivers. So it's not the river itself per se, but the land that's and the environment that's present in those rivers.
Hemantha, did you want to make any other observation?
I think one of the observation I want to share now, time to time we see a lot of Indian clinical waste and some plastics waste in the Sri Lankan coast. At one point, I have checked almost like 10 kilometers of the coastline in Mana area, which is in the northern coast, actually full of waste. And sometime, so we realized that during the floods in Kerala, there are a lot of waste coming to Sri Lanka, and very recently it was in the eastern coast as well. And some of the waste we found inside the stomach of some of tuna. Actually, some of the waste come from India. So I think so. It's this transboundary pollution is something that is serious, and I don't know the how. I mean, yes, we can blame the different countries for dumping. You know, even the World Bank report identify who are the worst littering countries. You know, but some of these information perhaps not be correct. I think in a way, Dr. Shahriar is right, because I think the science and the research work so far, it is not adequate, and also we see that the repetition of these research work, and recently I have seen at least 3 different research work, policy making work by various funding agencies, that they are overlapping each other, and also they are doing the same kind of thing. And I have raised this issue at the last 2-3 meetings. Why you guys are doing the same kind of research, same sort of survey, same sort of people you get involved? I say so. I myself feel like recycling in these meetings, because we're talking the same thing in the same meetings. It's the same stakeholders we are talking, the same companies attending those meetings. So I think there's no coordination between the funding agencies, the European Union, the USAID, and all of them. So they don't know each other. Sometimes these research are actually done by the non-local people, and when somebody else have got this the project implementation role, and they don't know what has happened. Actually, they will come and do the repetition, and they will come and do the brainstorming, the same people. So I think if they're doing a national level or even a regional level, I think they have to bring and agree on a clear pathway. What is even the research and development? What is that pathway? So we want to have, and it is the duty. I mean, of course, SACEP in South Asian countries, it is not that much active in this work. But I know ASEAN, comparatively, ASEAN is doing much better. So I think these are some platforms that you can bring all the stakeholders and come to a sort of a plan, master plan, and then you do something. So that is where I believe that a global treaty can bring us to a sort of a streamlining all these activities, and you will not duplicate the funding. At the moment, we see there are a lot of money available with some of these, but the money doesn't give the sustainable the solutions to this issue. So it is just investing, but it doesn't bring a real solutions. I think that is something concern for me.
Thanks. And Carol, did you
yeah, sorry, I just missed them. I just wanted to add, like, if you look at the gaps or the financing mechanism, so a lot of this developing countries lack resources, lack the funding to actually push forward for more efficient or more effective waste management systems. So that's also something that we want to achieve through the Global Plastics Treaty, to direct the financial support to the Global South and to countries who actually need it.
And Union.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. It's interesting, the discussions, isn't it? River plastics. In Indonesia, after Dr. Jambek published her paper, the researchers, Indonesian researchers, got together because they said it's incorrect. It's like what Hemanta said, because the research was done not by local scientists. So the assumptions used also a bit far from the reality. So scientists from the Indonesian Scientific Institution, LIPI, conducted a study, and then they shows that the plastic burden, it came from the river mainly, 40%, but not as much as the figure mentioned in the published papers. So Indonesia corrected that figure because it's closer to the reality. The second, to address the marine pollution in Indonesia, the Minister of Maritime Affairs already pledged to invest, not to invest, but to allocate $1 billion by 2030 to address the marine plastic pollution. However, the implementation is still unclear because nobody knows exactly how this $1 billion will be allocated to which ministers and to implement what. And now we've seen more and more the support from government to invest on RDF plant, which is refuse-derived fuel, to convert that plastic waste into RDF. The problem is that we are going to shift the problem from marine litter or river to the air. So if we don't have sufficient infrastructures and measures to control all kinds of pollutions, no matter how much money poured by donors, it will still be unsolved. So I think it's important to highlight that the financial support is important, but countries have to have their own process, how they are going to address it domestically. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that picks up Anna Itkin's question about, how individual countries can respond. I think there's one good question, and it was a question raised it's anonymously, and someone emailed it to me before, is in terms of the future and the chances of how civil society and academia can match the strength of the oil and gas and the plastic and industry lobbies. So we're giving you a sort of an opportunity to close, to make a quick closing statement. And Robert Steele also identifies, social media to address the issue in terms of there's overwhelming community support clearly for action, and NGOs and some industries have realized that this is important to address. I wonder, what next? Where we go? We have the UN Environment Assembly. If a resolution is passed, where does the future go, and how do we move towards a plastics treaty that actually can help solve the problem? Union.
Matthew, can I go first because I
Please.
need to go? Sorry. So as I mentioned in the answer, we have to help our negotiators, because if our negotiators could not have a strong positions during the negotiations, they will be wiped out, because regionally, the stronger voice that accommodated in the negotiations from regional decisions or positions. So to support the strong positions of Asia Pacific or ASEAN, we have to help our negotiators and to feed them with all of our information, fact sheets, and so on. So we will be strong together, not only the civil society scientists, but also the negotiators from the government representatives. So I think we have to help them. So we have to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Samantha?
Yes, and I fully agree with you. I think that is our task at this moment. We all have the same experience working doing the advocacy at the during the international conferences, and we see that certain producer countries, especially at least in this case, 5 major producers, and also the many of those FMCG companies and all. When we look at all the brand audits done by BFFP and GAIA and all of us, and we know that Coca-Cola, Unilever, and all these big companies, and they will continue to lobby. And like what happened during the Glasgow, so many hundreds and thousands of people they will be bringing, and that is the hard part of these kind of international negotiations. I think supporting our local government to do the negotiation with the science, facts, and evidence, and I think all these research work done by various organizations like GAIA and others. I think that is the background for supporting these our scientists, our negotiators. I think at this moment we have to make sure that this resolution passed with a full mandate, and then only we can take some time for continuing our advocacy. So I think we have a very very busy 5-6 days in next week. I think it's starting today. So we all have to work hard through social media and other media as well. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Hemanta. Dr. Sharia, would you?
I think Hemanta and you done the job. I have nothing to say at this moment. And just one thing to be mentioned, that the coming future will be very tough. So we have to be careful on that. We have to work together. And definitely we cannot exclude the government, the negotiators. We have to find the proper person in the proper place. Thank you.
Thank you. And Carol.
Yeah. I think I'd encourage everyone to get involved and get in touch with groups who are already actively campaigning for the Global Plastics Treaty. So that way we're on the loop, and then if there are national consultations, we can attend, and definitely utilize the resources that we already have, and amplify in digital media, and if we could lobby to our national ministers and support our negotiators as well. Yeah, a lot of good points coming from the other speakers. So I think that would be all.
Thank you very much indeed. And again, on behalf of the Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law, thank you very much, Hemanta, Dr. Sharia, Carol, and Union for your participation. I also would like to thank very much our partners, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, Environment Social Development Organization, and Greenpeace for helping us put on this webinar, and the team, Colleen, Pum, and Pao, from Ariel for putting it on. We will present and develop and collect the materials, and the webinar itself will be recorded on our YouTube channel, and we will provide the link to all the participants for the download of those materials. Can I also ask any participants who want a certificate for attending if they can fill out the form that Colleen has provided, the Google Forms. So on behalf of the Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law, again, thank you very much. This is our second webinar for the year. Our first one was done last month on the UN Waste Project, so it's obviously been a waste 2 months. Our next webinar in March will look at environmental and human rights defenders, which is one of the increasing challenges in our region about ensuring that we protect those people who are arguing for a safer, better, and clean and more sustainable environment. And I think if I can echo all of our panelists today with this really important issue of plastics and plastic management and plastic disposal, how we deal with our plastic issue is just as important as how we deal with climate change, how we deal with air pollution. These are the issues that will define our next generation, because they are something that has emerged over the last 30 years, although the science goes back even longer than that. And looking at science-based solutions as well as nature-based solutions are going to be very, very important in this coming year, in this coming decade. But above all, if I can echo the comment from Carol, it's about engagement. And this is where I think civil society on this issue coming together, demonstrating the ability to work with government and even willing industries is actually the hope for the future. So on behalf of the Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law and all of our partners, thank you very much to our speakers for an extraordinary opportunity to hear from you and to ask questions, and also our participants for all your questions and answers. And I look forward to seeing you and hope that you can join me next week when we look at environmental human rights defenders as part of our environmental law webinar series. So thank you very much indeed. And from me, it's goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.